get into this. I recently asked a question on my Instagram. A question that I ask for all the time is something that I feel very passionate about. I love talking about it. But I asked, do you think that God creates our spouses for us, or do we just get to choose? Or, do we have free reign in that area of our lives? It is something that I battle with for a long time. Like, never knew what my clear thoughts were, could never give clarity on it. Somebody asked me, because I was like, I don't know. So I've done a lot of research, heard a lot of opinions, read the Bible, because there's no clear, answer. Some people say, God told me that was my husband, or some people, even Christians, say, God has nothing to do with us, our spouses, our marriages aren't spiritual. I remember I read a tweet and a girl was saying that, like, spouses and marriage has nothing to do with spirituality, and I was like, ooh, like, that just did not sit well with me. I'm like, okay, so I clearly don't believe that, so what do I believe? And I think that just recently, really, I've been able to figure that out, figure out what my thoughts were on the topic. So I'll just say that I think both things happen. I think that God creates our spouses for us, and then we choose. I think if both of those things didn't happen, then that would go directly against who God is and who He created us to be, and the freedom that He's given us on this earth. So God is intentional and purposeful, and so it doesn't make sense in my head that He would create me without creating a spouse in mind for me, like directly related to me and for my purpose, like somebody that would align with my values and where I'm going, and somebody that would push me to do better. Like, it doesn't make sense in my head that God wouldn't do that. Like, God is so intentional and so purposeful. Like, He never does anything without intentionality. But He will never, or has never, taken away our free will. Like, we've always had freedom of choice. So if both of those things didn't happen as it relates to spouses, then that goes against who I believe God to be. And so that, like, the idea that both of them don't happen has never set well with my spirit. And so now I think I have a very clear idea of what I think happens. So I believe that God creates a spouse for us, someone in mind for us, someone purposeful that lines up with who we are, like, that'll help us to live out our best life and to help us glorify the name of the Father. But I also think that when God creates, He presents. Here you are. This is the person I have for you. This is my best for you. Now what? And then we choose. I know there are plenty of people dating people that they're not, that's not God's best for them, or even married to people that they chose that were not God's best for them. And, God gives us grace when we go our own way, to still have a fruitful and productive and purposeful life, but, like, you're still not living with the best spouse that God intended for you. So I'm gonna read from my Bible, Genesis chapter 2 and verse 21. And so the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While the man slept, the Lord God took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the opening. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and He brought her to the man. And before that verse, we can see, God created Adam, gave him identity, gave him purpose, gave him a job to do, to look over all the things that God had created. And then He said, it's not good for this man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him. Those are, like, key words, just right. Like, God was going to create somebody that was for him, like, with him in mind, with purpose in mind, with righteousness in mind. And then He goes on where He says He brought the animals and the birds from the sky and told Adam to name them. And even at the end He said, but still there was no helper just right for him. So, like, animals couldn't do it. They couldn't do what Eve was created to do. And so then, in verse 21, He puts Adam to sleep, takes his rib, and makes Eve out of the rib. Eve was a piece of him. If that's not purposeful, I don't know what is. Like, they were like this from the very beginning. Like, she was made from his body. And then, in verse 23, Adam goes on to say, this one is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken from man. Like, that is when he chose her. Verse 22 says, the Lord God made a woman from the rib and he brought her to the man. That's all he did. God didn't say, this is your wife, choose her, or have nobody else. Like, Adam used his free will and his common sense and his feelings, his emotions. Y'all, he thought she was cute. Like, whatever the case may be, he chose Eve, which was God created best for him. The person that God thought to be just right for him. So, like, if that's how it happens in the Bible, and the Bible is supposed to be, like, our guide for life, then that's how I'm going to say it happens for me. That is how I believe it happens. That narrative sits well with my spirit and with what I believe about God. He creates, he presents, and then he leaves it up to us to choose. Now, I do believe that sometimes we make the wrong choice and we go and do things our own way. And so I believe that's where grace and mercy comes in. God still gives us grace to, move on with our lives and, have a productive life and still walk in our callings and whatnot. But, like, know that your spouse that you're with was not God's best for you. That was what you wanted, and so now your best was given to somebody else because you was playing games or whatever the case may be. Sometimes, things just happen. Life happens and we choose differently than what I think we should. But I do believe that's where grace comes in. But again, he creates, he presents, we choose, and that is